Killen of the Killen Report. It is important that policymakers and voters around the world understand a few of the words that leaders of countries and companies use when they state what they are going to do with respect to stopping carbon emissions. Ripu Malhotra is a leading authority on topics such as greenhouse gas emissions and solutions that we will discuss. And he is also the author of this book, A Cubic Mile of Oil. Ripu, how are you today?
Michael, thank you very much. I'm well.
I have a few questions about the terms that I think are very difficult for the world to understand. The EU made a statement. It aims to be carbon neutral at 2050, an economy with net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Ripu, I heard two terms in that sentence that I think are difficult for policymakers to understand. The first one is carbon neutral. What does that mean?
Actually, the two terms you mentioned, carbon neutral and net zero, are really very, very similar. They are synonymous. So the goal, of course, is to cut down greenhouse gas emissions to as low as we can. And then if you cannot get them to zero yourself, you can offset what you are doing by doing something else elsewhere. That's how the net or neutralization therefore happens when introduced. If someone says we're going to be carbon zero or we will have zero emissions, that is straightforward to understand. When there is net or neutrality, this is achieved through some other mechanisms sometimes. So the process or the entity is not entirely carbon-free, but is going to compensate for that by doing something good elsewhere.
So when I hear net zero greenhouse gases and climate neutral, that does not mean the country or the corporation is no longer or has not been able to reduce its emissions to zero. Is that correct?
That is correct. But they are they are achieving the equivalence of that by doing something else.
What's that?
Now this opens up a thing, and I don't think myself as the one most qualified to answer that. It's going to take a few lawyers to answer that question, because there are so many rules and regulations as to how you achieve neutrality and what emissions are considered and what are exempt. Is biomass considered zero? Well, it is zero only if you ignore the carbon dioxide that comes out immediately, and it depends on the time frame that it takes for the trees to grow back and absorb that carbon. But in the meantime, initially, you have released a whole lot of carbon. Then there are things like carbon capture and sequestration or reforestation elsewhere. So it depends on how the numbers have been established and accepted within various protocols as to how they get the net zero. One other common way is by buying renewable energy credits, at least within the same country or within the same,
Regional area?
Regional area, right. Those regional organizations for power, the USOs.
What about just the United States? We have what, 50 states or 40 states? If I'm in California and I'm not quite making my promised neutral emissions, can I buy credits from, let's say, Montana?
Yes, yes. So I'm not using the Montana electricity necessarily, but I'm buying credits from them. And so I can say I have achieved net neutrality.
So statements like carbon neutral and net zero are sort of very loose terms.
I wouldn't say that necessarily. They may have very specific meanings in the context. And that's really, one has to dig deeper into it. And people use it very commonly, almost interchangeably. But I am sure that in the bylaws and in the details, in the minutiae, they're all spelled out. That's my expectation.
All right, President Joe Biden said he wants the United States to be carbon neutral by 2050.
Yeah,
So he's saying the same thing the EU is saying.
yeah.
And I notice BP and Shell have stated the same thing. By 2050, they would achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions. But in saying that, they don't talk about all the gasoline they have sold and all the emissions that their products are going to sell. So in a way that statement is not such a powerful, important statement.
Right. So when you are talking about large countries, things like that, let's say United States achieving net neutrality, it could achieve net neutrality also by saying, okay, we have this extra emissions of so many billion tons at the moment. We will support a country in another region, pick, say, for example, India, and we will help install uh, so many gigawatts of solar over there and compensate. That's one work. That could be one way of achieving net neutrality by reforesting portions of the Amazon and say, okay, a tree on an average takes X tons of CO2 out of the air that year. So we will use that to achieve our net neutrality.
Okay, so far, the United States, the EU, and BP and Shell have all said they want to attain the goal we just stated by 2050. What do you think it means when China pledges to be carbon neutral by 2060? How come they need another 10 years?
It takes longer. They haven't been, China wasn't the one that was dumping CO2 into the air for many, many decades when the US and Europe were developing. So China's excuse when they put it up is, well, we have a lot of development to do right now. Okay, so we are getting very advanced and we can begin, but give us another 10 years before we can start to peak. And I mean, they said that they will peak by 2030. So that's another 10 years. And then by 2060, they will be carbon neutral.
So if I read on television or in the newspapers that China is going to lead the world in carbon neutrality 2060, am I correct to say they're not going to lead the world, assuming the EU and the BP and the United States accomplish this in 2050?
Well, okay, but we need everybody to get there. And so in terms of global emissions, China is right now the biggest emitter. So the world is waiting for China. And after the US and the EU go down and China goes down, there'll probably be India still emitting, and there will be Pakistan still emitting, and there will be Venezuela still emitting. And we have to compensate for those also. Maybe we will start putting in carbon capture or carbon reversal technologies, implementing those so that we can draw it down uh, to back to the levels, because we have way too much excess carbon in the atmosphere right now. And there is urgency to bring it down. And so just getting to net zero means that still leaves a huge legacy of carbon in the air and the climate warming that that can engender.
All right, very good. Now, I raised an issue about a couple of terms. Can you raise an issue or a phrase that is also difficult for policymakers and voters around the world to comprehend? Come on, you must have a few of them.
Well, they're all related terms. They sound very similar. Carbon zero or climate zero or climate neutral, carbon neutral, net positive, positive energy, energy positive or energy negative. And they were oftentimes describing buildings. And all these terms have to be, you have to look at, are we looking at just the electricity use? Are we looking at gas use as well? Are we looking at all? So you have to look at the fine print. That's my word, is look at the fine print of, and different people define it differently.
So you are discussing what Descartes said, define your terms clearly and you eliminate half of mankind's confusion. So you want everyone to go look up the terms and their confusion will go away.
And be disciplined about using it.
Okay, I would like to shift the discussion to a different subject. I'm under the impression that right now the world is not working that hard to stop emissions. And I'm wondering when the world may get serious about setting firm, important goals and commitments to do something really helpful. I have in my mind 2050. I would like to have your opinion on when the world will really get serious about stopping emissions. Come on, Ripu.
What do you mean by world? Define your terms. I will ask you, what do you mean by world? Because do you mean all the 9 billion people that will be here by then?
No, I mean all the developed nations.
Well, they are starting. They're making pronouncements, and making pronouncements is not enough. We both understand that. But making pronouncements is the first step, and they are making them. And that's good news. But are they following through with the right actions? Not in my mind. In my mind, they're missing the big boat. They're not addressing it in the way that they should.
Okay, does 2050, 2025 sound like a date when they may get more serious?
Well, more is more than today. Yes, it will be more serious than that. But the real thing is when the public really embraces nuclear power, I think it'll really make a difference. So if you can help educate the public to get over the fear of radiation and embrace nuclear technology, we will be well on the way.
Okay, then when, I'm still going by my number, 2025, let's just assume the world gets serious, and to throw in your statement, get serious about nuclear energy. If in 5 years they get serious, have plans, when will they start to implement those plans?
Another 5 years. Because the good thing is that NRC has already approved some of the plans. And the first plant that happened very recently in the last few months. So I think that was a very good sign. And they will start rolling out.
Okay, so that's 10 years from now. This will be my last question. You mentioned nuclear would be one important solution. Can I have another one for you?
Well, there are many places where renewables, like, solar and things can be applied in large scale, and they are doing those. I just read today massive engagements for using wind power to generate hydrogen.
Good.
Doesn't make much sense to me, but it will make a dent.
What about a third one? How about a cap
Cap and
on carbon?
now those are the economic things. Okay, I was thinking technology. So economically, yeah, you also have those levers. You institute cap and trade, and that raises funds to drive the innovation.
Yes.
But yeah,
What
that's
about
another way to do it.
what about
Moving,
what about a percentage on electric vehicles?
so they will make a difference if your electricity is carbon free. If it is not, then they don't. But yes, we do want to get there, and we want to get there in hurry. A big impact you can make right now is by making sure that the cooling systems, the refrigerants that we are using, are not leaking. Another big source is the methane emissions from
Yes.
fracking. If we can cap those, if we can trace those, we would make a really big difference.
All right. When the countries and corporations talk about meeting goals like carbon neutrality, do they include methane?
Yes,
They do.
because
Good.
but if they measure, the thing is many times they don't measure. So if you don't measure, how do you say you have achieved it?
All right. Ripu, you have been a wonderful guest, a cubic mile of oil, a good book to read. And if you enjoyed this discussion, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for welcoming us into your home and office, and follow us on any social media that you utilize. I'm Michael Killen. Thank you, Ripu.
Thank you for Michael.